Hi, and welcome to the Hive Hub, where startup founders and innovators come to learn from the best in the game. I'm Abha from the Base Hive team, and today joining me is the Chief Marketing Officer and a partner at SynFutures, Mark. Today we're going to be discussing Crypto Marketing 101, scaling up your startups. SynFutures is a decentralized derivatives powerhouse that's reshaping the DeFi landscape today. It's great to have you here, Mark.
Yeah,
Hello.
thanks for having me. Yeah, I love what
Thank
you
you so
guys are
much
doing
for
in the
taking out the
base
time.
ecosystem. So excited to chat here.
Yeah. So the essence of Base Hive is to help our early stage startup founders and give really just that mentorship and guidance beyond funding to really help them scale up. And given that marketing is such a big part of really a journey of a startup from 0 to 10, it would be great to hear your insights about this. So just diving straight into it, your journey in Web3 has been from the spectrum of starting your own agency, that's 85PR, to now leading the marketing efforts at SynFutures. So tell us more about your journey and what inspired you to get into DeFi and crypto, and how has the journey been for you so far?
Yeah, sure. So I had like a little bit of an unconventional journey into marketing. So for undergrad uni, I studied finance. And right out of school for about 5 years, I worked at like a boutique private equity firm. So it was something very different, but I had the chance to kind of explore other interests, especially on the creative side. And many years ago, I got into the Web2 space, working on communication strategy and marketing for a lot of Silicon Valley projects, from everything from like B2C apps like social media platforms all the way to B2B platforms like enterprise software. And so I think around 2018, I started getting introduced by some of the VCs I work with out in the Valley to some blockchain or crypto companies as a form of emerging tech. And I started taking some of them on as clients. That's when I spun out into 85, which was like a Web3 native marketing agency. Um, so I worked with a bunch of projects there, and I quickly realized that this was a new frontier, and I quite liked that it was a new industry and that it was pretty much uncharted territory at the time. So I realized I could quickly become an expert in the space. I had built up a pretty decent network at the time. And so, yeah, 2018, I jumped full into crypto marketing. I haven't looked back since. And it's interesting because I have this, I started my career looking at like the pure number side of things, like the business oriented side of the business. And, I got a few years exposure to Web2 marketing, which I would say, there's now some overlap between Web2 and Web3 marketing, but still quite different, the things you focus on. Like Web3, you index a lot on community, for example.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so I think I have like a blend of both traditional marketing and kind of this new age Web3 marketing. Like I mentioned, we are seeing a convergence in the two, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about like the nuances of it.
Right. So you spoke about community building. How important do you think is community building for the success of Web3 startup versus in Web2, like you said? And what are the best strategies you would suggest for somebody, say, bootstrapping community building and general marketing efforts on like a tight budget, somebody just in the early stages of it?
Yeah, I think about that a lot because I think about how Web3 leans so heavy on its community.
Right.
For its marketing efforts. And so it's not something you really see in Web 2. There are some like direct to consumer brands that have like these cultish community followings, but I don't think it's the norm, right? Um, Web 3, I think there's a reason for that. First, I think when you're building new technology, you need the new believers in place, right? a lot of what people are building in Web3 are either kind of very infrastructure based or very experimental, even on the B2C side. So you'll have these like social fi apps, GameFi apps. They aren't proven concepts. And so I think you really do need to build this like community of new believers, right? The other reason is a lot of Web3 projects go on to launch tokens. And so you almost have to look at it like two projects. You have your product, and then you have your token. The token, obviously, you're catering to a lot of retail investors, retail holders, and so that requires a pretty extensive effort on the community marketing side. Um, Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Yeah. So just any strategies that somebody who's bootstrapping their
Oh,
project could
right.
adopt.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of strategy, I would start by giving something to avoid. There are a lot
Okay.
of platforms out there now that incentivize kind of, uh, I would say, very surface level community building. These are questing platforms. I'll say from the
Yeah.
very start, you want to, I know it's very tempting for founders to kind of leverage questing platforms to bootstrap their community, but I would say you should maybe save that for later on. There's a time and place for it, right? I'm not saying those questing platforms like Galaxy are bad. I'm just saying like you have to use it at the right time and for the right purposes. In the beginning, I think it's crucial to really get an organic fan base, like an organic group of supporters. And so the best way to do that is just get out there yourself, become vocal on Twitter, become vocal in Telegram channels, on Discords, um, and really get people to subscribe to your kind of vision and your mentality. Um, I think beyond that, if you have a product that's live, start talking to your users, really understand who they are, what they want. And you'd be surprised how many of these users may convert to your first community members. So I think before you scale and before you try all these growth hacks that everybody has in Web3, you should really build as organic of a community as you can. And of course, it may not be scalable, right? But that's the thing they say about building a great startup is do things that don't scale. And so my advice is do a grassroots effort, get out there one-on-one with with your potential community base, with the users, and start converting them. And maybe that's how you start with your first 10, 20, 30 community members, because these members are much more valuable than the ones that'll come later from these big giveaway incentivized campaigns, because they're a lot more vested in your vision and your journey.
Right. And I feel like user feedback, those initial users can always give you a feedback that can maybe help you fill the gaps within your product or your project and like make it better, right? For you, the user experience wise.
That's right. Yeah. And there's a really fun example of this. Like, you guys follow the Airbnb story. When they first started, they were booking their own listings and then visiting the hosts to see who were the type of people who are willing to host their apartment or home to strangers. And so one of the Airbnb founders was out there kind of interviewing these early hosts to get an understanding. And the story is that one of the hosts was so interested in the project that they ended up providing so much insight. I think they handed over like a little book that they had put together of different ideas on how to improve the Airbnb experience. So yeah, never underestimate the impact of your early users and what kind of contribution they might have to your roadmap.
Yeah. So SynFutures has a huge trading volume. What strategies did you personally adopt to push user adoption and like boost trading volumes to this extent?
Yeah, there are definitely many layers to that, but I'd say, it all starts with your product, right? Make sure you're building a product that people want and that's, battle tested over time. Obviously, you won't be able to have that from day one, but I think for us, we took our time to kind of build out the product. We started in 2021. Our first version looked extremely different from what you see today. And so the products definitely evolved with user feedback, with markets, with the narratives, and things like that. But yeah, building a good product that continues to evolve with your users, that's going to kind of guarantee usage. Right? I think beyond that, there are many different ways for you to kind of excite the community. I think the most recent examples might be some of the big trading competitions we've run. We're always working with our partners, so other token communities who are looking to list on our platform, and we'll run some, fun trading competitions to it's a win-win, right? Like, so for our traders, they get a chance to trade an asset that they might be interested in and have a chance at earning some kind of reward pool. And then for our partners, they get exposure to our community. We've had 100,000 plus users, 200 million plus 300. I think we're closing on 300 million,
Yeah.
300, sorry, 300 billion cumulative trading volume. And so it's a lot of exposure for the other projects as well. Of course, we did your kind of the Web3 standard playbook of a points program. This is back earlier last year, maybe mid last year. I would say any advice you get on like marketing in general is you have to take it with a grain of salt because the Web3 space changes so fast. So I think we caught the tail end of the points meta, and the points meta has died to some extent. I mean, it still exists in some programs, and you know, I think it'll continue to exist. People just may call it something different, structure it different, but the concept is the same, right? How do you reward early users to use your products? And I see people doing like XP systems, for example, which is just another version of a points program. So I think it's a combination of things that include your products, some tie aligning incentives with your users through a points program or through an XP system or whatever it is, and then also kind of the right type of partner marketing can have exponential returns for I think both sides.
Right. Yeah, Web3, I feel, thrives on these symbiotic growth relationships, right?
That's right.
Where there's like mutual benefit. And yeah, moving on, what KPIs do you think somebody should focus on to measure success of a marketing campaign?
Yeah, it definitely depends on what your product is and what your goals are. Starting with I guess top of funnel, which is like you want to drive the awareness. Probably if you're running like let's say social media campaigns on X, you definitely start by looking at impressions, interactions. But I always tell people these are vanity metrics, right? Very easy for this to be gamed through bots or anything like that, or some kind of incentivized kind of campaign to drive viewers. So you want to kind of get below the vanity metrics. Make sure you're using like unique tracking links, like UTMs. Even better if you can use those to track on-chain conversions. So sometimes we'll use links when we work with KOLs, and we'll look at things like click-through rates, website conversions, but even like wallet connects, how much they're depositing, and so forth. So you really want to like map KPIs back to your core business metrics. This makes sense for us because we're a B2C app, we're a DeFi trading platform. So things like deposits or first trades are really good markers of an effective marketing campaign. But if you're running a B2B platform, that might be different, right? That might be, more along the lines of inquiries, form submissions or so forth. So I think it really depends. And then going beyond that, actually, I'm surprised that in Web3, especially on the B2C side, I don't see like a ton of focus on things like LTV. So looking at your customer lifetime value. And that's very important, right? Because it should ultimately dictate how much you're spending on marketing. If I just threw out a number to someone and I said, hey, we can run this marketing campaign, and the cost of user acquisition is going to be $150 per user. Maybe on the surface, someone might say, hey, that sounds quite expensive. We're paying $150 to acquire each user. But then if we look into the data behind it, the lifetime value of that customer is 450. It's a 3x return on your ad spend. Then that's an effective use of marketing spend. So, you have to look at all these KPIs outside of silos, and kind of
The bigger
make sense.
picture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think in terms of KPIs, yeah, just map them to your goals, your products, and the user interaction or customer interaction that you would like to achieve. And then start from there, and then you can get very granular with it. But I think again, it's different for every type of business. So I'll just leave it at that.
So, speaking of X, there's recently just been so much happening with the big hacks in the market that everybody's been talking about. There's been WazirX and then there's been Bybit, and it blew up social media. That's all everybody could talk about for weeks on end. But I mean, if you look at the PR approach to both things, WazirX really just lost so much of its market repute, whereas Bybit has come out of it without as much criticism. So, from the marketing perspective, how do you really prepare for these unforeseen panic situations? And how does because given how volatile Web3 can be and how quickly things can just flip overnight, how does one best safeguard their project and their users?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, no one wants these things. Like, no one anticipates this happening to them. But I think it's very important that you have some kind of crisis management framework in place. I mean, it doesn't have to be an extensive plan or anything because it's very hard to anticipate exactly what will happen. But I think it's there are some general kind of buckets that these crises could fall into, right? Especially based on your product. So if you're an exchange, the obvious one is a hack on user funds, if you're a centralized exchange. So as part of your communication strategy, you should have a very loose framework for in scenarios A, B, and C, one of them being user funds are exploited or hacked. What type of response do we put out? What type of messaging do we own? And then, some of these are business decisions. You have to decide how quickly do we want to respond in detail before the definitive kind of findings are out, right? Why Ben from Bybit did an amazing job is he came out quick. I think, in any time of crises, speed is critical, right? You want to get in front of any um, misinterpretations, rumors, and things like that. And so, anytime for sure you've had a crisis level event, you should be the first to address your users, your community, your investors, or whoever your target audience might be, right? So the first thing is speed. Get out there quick, put out a statement, even if it's just to say, hey, we're looking into the issue. We acknowledge that there's been some discrepancies in what you're seeing, and we'll keep you reported live, right? The second thing is transparency. So you want to be as transparent as possible. I mean, of course, there are some limitations to that, maybe for compliance reasons or for other reasons, but I think with your users and anyone who has a stake in what you're building, they deserve to know the facts, right? Which means, transparency doesn't only mean, telling it how it is. It's also about putting out as much detail as you can and helping them understand where you are, how you're going to resolve it, and how you're moving forward. And so, yeah, I would say open and transparent communications in a very timely manner is critical to managing a crisis.
So, just another crisis that could possibly happen for a project is regulatory hurdles, right? And you recently posted on X about you sitting down with the SEC commissioner and discussing the general regulatory ambiguity in Web3. And this is just seems to be such a global phenomenon because there are so many projects that face this regulatory lack of like clarity and can't scale or like just have so many hurdles in growing their product or marketing it in a certain way because either because of regulatory ambiguity or just because there's like a clear ban. So from a marketing perspective, how do you really navigate that and like just maintain a balance between being compliant but also growing and scaling?
Yeah, I think Web3, we have a history of, doing now and doing and asking for forgiveness later. Those were the early days of crypto, and especially during like the ICO days. I think that's changed a bit. So for us, we want to make sure we're on the right side of regulation, meaning, as a DeFi product, obviously we want to be open as permissionless as possible, but we also want to respect the regulatory framework of the jurisdiction that we'd like to serve. Um, so the first thing that you have to do is you have to work with your legal counsel and figure out what you can and can't do in what markets, right? And sometimes there are a lot of nuances to, you can market overall from a global perspective, but if there's any localized component, like where you feel like you're targeting specific users in a country, then that may be, something that's frowned upon by regulators. And so, there's a little bit of ambiguity that still exists around things, rules like that, but I would say do your best to be on the right side because you never know, what the shifts are going to be in the regulatory environment. You definitely want to be like you don't want to be retroactively punished for something that you did, even if
Absolutely.
the legal framework doesn't clearly define it yet, right? Because that's definitely there's a lot of precedent for that. And so, yeah, I think working very closely with your legal counsel to define what you should and should not be doing. Um, Especially if you want to be a long-term project. I understand if you're a meme coin
Yeah.
and you're like not thinking long-term. I can see that you would be tempted to try many different kind of questionable marketing tactics. But I would say if you're building a long-term project, yeah, you should try to do it the right way because who knows, the regulation may actually lean in your favor in the future. And so you don't want to have this like black mark of, oh, they had questionable marketing practices targeting this demographic of users. Um, and and that may hold you back in the future. I mean, I think luckily there's not as much regulation as you see in Web2 marketing. So let's say in the US, for example, like the FTC gets involved a lot um, in the way you market to users. We don't really have that in Web3, but I think it's up to us to self-regulate to some extent to be, to offer a reasonable kind of experience for people who receive our message.
No, as a lawyer myself, I totally agree with you. I mean, prioritizing compliance is an absolute necessity, and actually something I feel in Web3 until quite recently has been an afterthought, but is something that should be just as important to make sure your project can survive like long term and not
That's
die
right.
down because of
Yeah.
this. Yeah. Uh, so just circling back to any more advice for startup founders, where do they start their marketing journey? Just any insight you could give would be great.
Yeah, I think when you're first getting started, especially if you don't have like a formal marketing background, well, actually, before I get there, this is important. I think everyone talks about founder-led marketing, right? Or founder-driven marketing being the key to successful products and driving successful awareness for what you're doing. And I completely agree with that. So if you're a founder, especially early stage, you're at the seed stage, pre-seed, you're just now starting the project, you're hoping to gain that initial traction. I know it's tempting to bring on like a marketing consultant, a marketing agency, a marketing leader. I mean, you happen to have a marketing leader on the founding team, that's great. But from what I see, not a lot of founders have that kind of opportunity from the start. And so, yeah, a lot of them come to me and they say, "Hey, Mark, I have this new project. I have a little bit of funding and I want to bootstrap marketing, but I was thinking about bringing on some kind of marketing agency or consultant." Usually, I kind of shy away from that. I mean, unless you have like a massive war chest, maybe you raised a large seed round, and you're ready to kind of hit the ground running as soon as possible, then it might make sense. And it doesn't hurt to speak to marketing consultants. It'll give you some ideas, give you some like a general framework of where you should begin. But I wouldn't overly rely on them, right? And I know a lot of founders think, but I'm technical, or I'm just on the business side. I've never had any marketing exposure. I'm really not sure what to do, so marketing is not my thing. Well, it's your vision and your product, right? There's no better person to kind of dictate the initial kind of marketing framework based on that passion and the vision. So I would say for starters, yeah, don't shy away from marketing if you're a founder. Do whatever you have to do to get out there, get vocal. I know it's hard. Like people think, oh, I don't want to sound stupid. What? The reality is you will sound stupid sometimes if you put out enough content, right? But that's okay. It's part of the journey, and no one's going to knock you for it. Now, once you decide, hey, I'm a founder and I'm going to take on the responsibilities of marketing, at least at the initial phase, there are two things you should do. First is look at, obviously, um, copying is the sincerest form of flattery. So look at your favorite projects, right? The projects that really stood out to you in terms of brand, in terms of reach, and just learn from what they do. Take some time to sit there every day, say, hey, they're putting out this type of campaigns, or they're posting this type of content. And I'm not saying you should copy one for one, but it should give you some idea of like what should inspire your marketing strategy, right? And then hopefully you're going to take that and kind of inject your own voice and your own like unique twist to the campaign to make it yours. And you can get really creative with things. Try it out. Again, if it doesn't work, no one's knocking you for it. Just keep going. The other side is, I would say, especially with like ChatGPT, Grok, you can have it. You could prompt it to kind of teach you the fundamentals of marketing in a very um, intuitive way. And so I would say just understand kind of how the funnels work: top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of the funnel. What are the different tactics that play into that? Look into tools that you might be able to leverage to, we talked about KPIs, but being able to track these KPIs and analyze exactly what's working and what's not. And so I would say, like, maybe spend a little bit of time just getting a general lay of the marketing landscape, and then getting more specific into what projects are doing. Then the final piece of advice is don't limit yourself to what Web3 projects are doing, right? Web3 projects, I think overall in brand and marketing is quite limited. And the reason for that, I think, is we've been talking to a very niche audience for a very long time. I've been in crypto for 7 years now, and the way we speak to our audience has not changed. It needs to. Um, there's still too much technical jargon. The UI UX is still very crypto native, means it's complicated for normies to navigate. And so start taking some inspiration from your favorite Web2 apps, right? So for a trading platform, I look at I look at not only crypto trading apps like Coinbase, but even, the Robinhoods, Acorns. These are like these popular Web2 fintech apps. And I try to get inspiration from like what they're doing well, because I think Web2 apps really optimize for user conversion. And so um, it's definitely something you can learn. Um, and it also gives you a different perspective, and it starts training you to think about onboarding the masses. I was looking at some stats that DeFi, well, okay, so in the last couple of years, crypto holders have 7x. So we've seen 7x growth in uh, potential on-chain users. Right? But in DeFi usage has kind of stagnated since 2021. So we've seen very little net new growth. And so for us, we think a lot about, in terms of marketing, in terms of product design, how do we kind of learn from the Web2 apps to start positioning us for true web mass adoption in terms of messaging, in terms of branding, in terms of the user flow, whatever it is. So I think thinking beyond just Web3 native marketing, we have to all, as an industry, think about onboarding Web2. And so getting a little more, broadening our kind of marketing perspective and our marketing net would be probably the most important thing we do for the next year or so.
So, would you suggest founder-led marketing over KOL-led marketing initially for
Yeah, of
a
course.
project?
So I think the new meta now is, if possible, you want founder-led marketing, and then you want your team to kind of support as well. So, the projects that right now have the most kind of active communities have executed on that very well. So projects like Monad, Mega Eve, they have these very vocal founders who are out there. They're not just shilling, right? They do a bit of shilling, of course, but they're also providing education. They're providing moral support to the community. They're they themselves are the number one KOLs of their ecosystem. And then you see their teams. Some of their teams are probably even more impactful than their founders, right? And I think that's what's really interesting. Like in crypto, with the way the communities work and way X works, it's like anyone can become a KOL if they put enough effort and if they know their lane. It's not just about posting every day. You have to know kind of what you're great at, right? So, I tend to look at posts, Twitter performance for certain KOLs. And some of them are not your traditional KOL, right? They're like VC investors who are, their profession is an investor, but they've taken on the role of a KOL because they've become quite influential. But what's really interesting is you see differences in personalities. So you have, investor A, who is known for their thought provoking insights, their deep research, or whatever that is, and they perform very well and they become known for that. But what's interesting is if they try to go and do a shit post, it won't perform as well because it's not what their brand is known for, right? Whereas you have investor B, who only writes short form content, and they're mostly shit posts, they're just poking fun at things, and it does really well. But if they try to do a long form piece, maybe it won't perform as well because that's not why people followed you. So know your kind of lane. Of course, you can veer off from it here and there, but like I think it should always kind of guide you back to what's helped you build that community to start. So yeah, founder and team-led marketing is probably the most impactful. It's something that you can own. KOL, you're kind of at their mercy at times. But yeah, if you can encourage your team and yourself to get out there, build an audience. Everyone has a unique personality, and so you should really leverage that.
So, just one final question: could you recommend any resources? Just KOLs on X or podcasts or books on open access resources? Anything that might help founders in just their marketing journey?
Yeah, I've been looking for like a good resource on books, but it's hard for Web3 because of the reason I mentioned. The the space changes so
Yeah.
fast. So like you just have to be terminally online, right? Because the narrative can change week over week, and so you just have to be ready to respond. Be on Twitter as much as you can. Obviously, you have many other things to do if you're running a startup, but take your free time to just scroll through the feeds, see what's working for people. In terms of there used to be a lot of marketing books I used to recommend, and some of them are not your like traditional marketing books. They're like behavioral psychology and things like that that can really uh, give you an edge in terms of the way you communicate to users or the way you position things. But these days, I think AI does such a great job. So I spend a lot of time prompting Rock for very specific things like marketing strategy. Sometimes if I come across an interesting book, I'll prompt it to read the book, become an expert on it, tie it to some. Recently I was doing some user research as I was trying to design like some elements of a new product, and I started prompting it like become an expert in user psychology and behavioral psychology and things like that, and then tie all that together with some of the marketing tactics that I've shared with you and some of the marketing books, the takeaways from the marketing books, and then spit out, guide me through the process of how I think about certain campaigns and things like that. So it's yeah, it's interesting because books are great as a foundation, but we now have a much more interactive way to engage with content and to learn. So I would say, yeah, leverage AI even for your learning. I was actually say that's a great use case for AI, but AI, from what I noticed, is still a bit limited in coming up with these marketing campaigns and crafting the perfect copy. And so try not to rely on it too much, right? Like I use it for ideas and I use it for um, yeah, sometimes I use it just to get my brain flowing and I'll kind of connect the pieces from there. Or I'll use it for the more executional side of things. Like if you need a large paper drafted, it can really help you. I mean, you should still put your personal touches on it. Yeah, I would say that's kind of the best place to start. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, just make sure to be active on Twitter. Like the narratives just change so often. You really, and even the KOLs from cycle to cycle fall in and out of favor, and so you really need to be current with what's going on.
Yeah, I think that is it. And thank you so much. This has been very helpful. I'm sure it'll help all the base Hive members that we onboard eventually a lot. And thank you for taking out the time. I'm just
Okay,
going to
awesome.